Okay, you're on. We're live. All right. What's up?
Not too much. How about you?
Not too much. Do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure thing. So I'm Skylar Hurwitz, and I am one of the congressional candidates in the Democratic primary in Pennsylvania's first district, coming up on April 28th of this year. I'm not really going to go through the whole pitch and everything, since I figure we'll probably talk a bit and about random different issues, but I guess I can touch on two or three of the kind of priorities of mine.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically, I call my platform the fair tax platform. The whole idea is that I have a small business. If I'm paying 15, 20% in corporate income taxes, it's crazy that companies like Apple and Amazon are paying zero, that the 400 wealthiest are paying less than working families. So it's that type of concept, but then also looking at automation
Mm-hmm.
and how we're going to have to look ahead at how we tax basically robots, so that we can actually have a functional society moving forward and fund these programs that so many of the more progressive candidates kind of talk about, because the reality is a lot of those jobs are being threatened by automation. So trying to sort of fuse uh, these two schools of thought that I think are being presented in the presidential side, but at a congressional level.
Okay. And
So
then was there one more? So I heard you said there were three. The three main things you're focusing on was one. It sounds like it has to do with like corporate
so
income tax. The other was like
so
automation and taxing robots. And then
and then the other is around basically the climate crisis, and so that's the fact that I'm a big supporter of the Green New Deal. I'm a big proponent of particularly the solar programs around that and wind programs around that, and the
mm-hmm.
fact that low interest loans for residential homeowners and community solar projects have about a 7 to 10 year repayment on that. And I've worked on some solar projects under the Obama administration with the National Association of Regional Councils in DC. And I basically want to try and take that type of work that we were doing to cut the cost of solar and scale that up across the country with these types of low interest loans. That's one of the key kind of pillars of my platform, is that energy program.
Okay. Um, how do you guys? I'm not too clear on who's running in your district. How are you
Uh,
guys doing right now? Do you know where you stand right now in the polls in terms of like how close you are?
So I know that I was actually the newest, I am the newest still candidate. There's still time for someone else to get in potentially, but
Mm-hmm.
as of now, I was the fourth candidate. There are three other candidates. They launched in July of this past year. I only joined in mid-November after we had municipal elections.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there's one candidate who raised the most money that first quarter. She's had some polling done against the current incumbent, Brian Fitzpatrick,
Yeah.
and that poll did not look so good for her.
Gotcha.
It was something like a 14 or 15 point margin. Um, Bless you.
Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty. Is it a fairly red district or?
I really wouldn't call it red. It's purple for sure.
Okay.
Because like for example, in 2016, it went blue for Hillary, but then at the congressional level, it stayed red.
Gotcha.
So it's a kind of a split district, and it's a strong family name that the incumbent has. His brother was a former congressman, and unfortunately, yeah, his brother passed away recently. So that's been bad news in the district lately, and is yeah, has just put a somber mood over the whole campaign trail for the time being. But I think everyone's going to start to get back to kind of full force soon. But the Democratic side is just such a wide open primary right now that I
Mm-hmm.
don't think he's had to worry about attacking any of us individually yet. He's just kind of letting us um, do our thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you for the way that this district works, is this one where you have the general election has to be one Democrat and one Republican, or is it like a free for all where you can have like two Democratic nominees or four? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, so it's definitely by the time of the general,
Mm-hmm.
you could have third party candidates, but if from each of the major parties, it'll just be one.
Gotcha. Okay.
We have a primary coming up that, even though it sounds like that means voters are getting to totally be the ones driving the conversation.
Uh-huh.
It's actually the first week of February, the local Democratic Party gets to endorse one of the 4 candidates potentially,
Mm-hmm.
and then that candidate gets the basically all the resources for 3 months through the end of the primary. So before any voters vote, 300 to 400 Democratic committee members basically decide who to back in the area. So that's something that my campaign has been looking to split that vote, and really just call in general for the fact that the voters should get to drive that process. It doesn't make sense that there's at this local level such a small group of people trying to guess which candidate voters will like the most and supporting them 3 months before the primary.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually looking like this might be one of the first times that vote really is split in a long time. The outgoing executive director of the local party is saying this is looking like it may be split. So that's pretty exciting for my campaign because we are definitely the underdogs at the moment.
And if that vote is split, then like 2 different candidates can get like official support from the Democratic Party, basically.
So then
Or
it's actually really interesting. So that part, it's kind of, from my understanding, an all or nothing at that point. So it's
oh,
kind
okay.
of like whatever they give to any candidate, they would have to give to all or to none. Is kind of my general understanding of it. But I'm sure there's some detail in the bylaws that I'm missing in some way. But that's my initial understanding. So it really just means that it would be a legitimate, like, not an open primary in the sense that independents and Republicans can vote for it, but an open primary in the sense that Democratic voters are voting without the scales having been tipped for somebody for a few months before voting. So that is just an exciting prospect kind of unto itself.
Okay,
um,
cool.
to make that happen. And yeah, that's I think going to provide a major opportunity for us because some of the other campaigns I think have been relying on getting that endorsement,
Mm-hmm.
and we're really gearing up to be ready to do a much more grassroots oriented campaign where we're not taking corporate money, we're not taking special interest money, we're really having people who want to volunteer to work on the campaign and want to help get the word out. That's the kind of momentum we're building up right now, and it's been surprisingly good because there just hasn't been a young candidate that's been able to break through around here at this level.
Mm-hmm.
And there are definitely people who they question it at first, but once you walk through, all my professional experience and then just where the country's at right now, it makes sense, and it's been the momentum's been building, so that's been excellent. And I'm hoping that by the end of this month, I can start to focus more on actual outreach with more voters instead of focusing so much. Like tonight, I was at 2 committee. There's 54 different municipalities in Bucks County.
Mm-hmm.
Like my district is Bucks County and a little bit of Montgomery County. So there's 54 different Bucks County Democratic groups then. So it's like each one has a monthly meeting, and you try and get to each one's monthly meeting to meet the people. And so you don't have a whole lot of time to just go and meet with normal voters who aren't voting Democrat all the time, which is what I would like to be doing, and bringing more people into the party and more people into the voting base and having more people kind of question the current issues that we're facing around inequality in particular, because I think that's just a major driving force behind a lot of the challenges we're facing.
Sure.
So I think you do an excellent job. I mean, I'll be honest, I was introduced to your channel pretty recently, but
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy seeing you take this type of spin on this channel, because my business that I started a few years ago started as a YouTube channel. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
I was covering. I'd gone from environmental work into distributed ledger technology, blockchain technology, and I had done a YouTube channel for a little while before building up a client base, and saw how that really engaged a new type of audience and a different type of base, and just kind of started a different kind of conversation. And I think it's really cool that you're managing to bridge that kind of conversation with your channel, and you're doing a much better job of it than I was. So.
Thanks a lot. Just curious, because you look pretty young. How old are you?
I am 27.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah.
What is the youngest like representative that we have in the United States? Do you know that off the top of your head?
I'm pretty sure it is AOC. So at 28 now, isn't she?
Is she? Okay. Oh, she's 30 years old now, but she would have
Oh
been
no, she's
20
30. She
something when
was
she ran.
28 when she won then.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
I don't know. Oh wow, I didn't know she was 30 now. Okay, so yeah. So I don't know of anyone younger than her. And in this district, certainly the average age is much higher than what it is in her district.
For sure.
So it's definitely a very different territory in that sense. But I'm up against three people who are very, very similar in their policies. They're very kind of centrist, and that's great for certain issues. But I think our current congressman, he's kind of known as the independent voice. Is his tagline. So the issue is basically getting around that. I think we've got to be a little bit more bold with what we talk about then.
Okay.
So
do you want to dive into some of these your three main positions or whatever? I can ask you a few questions or whatever. I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, we could dive into that. We could dive into any, if there's parts of my experience that you think are just interesting. It's whatever direction you want to go in.
Okay. Well, I guess real quick for some background, do you want to when you said you were starting a business that had to do with like blockchain stuff and YouTube stuff, what exactly did that entail?
Sure. So I had started that as a hobby. Back in 2017, I was working basically with Conservation International, and we were working on a project on the Mekong River. There were dams being put up, and I had read some articles about how Bitcoin mining equipment was being put in dams because there's actually kind of energy that's trapped too far from society at dams in remote areas. And so China is finding they could make money back on their investment by just putting these Bitcoin miners in the dams. And so I thought that was just insane and wanted to learn kind of more about it. And so I started to just record myself. 2017 is when all that stuff started to go really crazy. And so I started just recording myself trying to understand, basically tearing apart all these things because I thought a lot of them sounded kind of ridiculous, and trying to understand why were people going nuts over it. And then my wife got a job in the Netherlands. So I quit my job in Washington, D.C., and we moved abroad. And I didn't plan for that to become my company. But there just wasn't as much environmental work as I expected in the Netherlands. So there was interest in blockchain. So I partnered with a company out of Switzerland, and then the International Telecommunication Union, which writes standards around like various things to do with, telecoms equipment and phones and stuff. And they were looking at basically initial standards reports on distributed ledger technologies. So I was the editor on 4 of the reports. So I just kind of, through that channel, built up a reputation for being just overly critical, and that gained me a lot of people who didn't like me so much, but also a few companies that actually really wanted to work with me since I was asking tough questions and trying to help actually drive a conversation forward. So I was trying to figure out more of the real business applications, the environmental impacts, and trying to really drive home some of those arguments and understand it. And then got into different things like understanding some of the applications of like these digital currencies for gaming stuff, which I previously hadn't had a whole lot of interest in, but was really cool to kind of see that there are different ways of, taking something like I had done a demo in Malta at one point where it was kind of like taking, if you spend a year playing a game and you build up all your experience points and you want to, that same developer puts out another game and you want to kind of move your experience points over to it, that type of thing, or to create kind of a collective where you can move your experience across the different applications. So it was cool to be exposed to some of that. But at the end of the day, it was really different from my environmental work and my solar work.
Yeah.
But it was good. And I'm excited to now be focused more on public service again.
Okay. Well, I'm curious. We could start with the first thing. We're dealing with corporate tax policy, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I have basically like the next few days, I'll pretty much put out um, like I called it before, fair tax platform, because we could definitely dive into each one of these things, each of the different kind of tax rates. But the way I kind of think of this is a lot of people get freaked out when you talk about taxes. And so I like the whole kind of concept here is to package a lot of these different taxes that, for example, Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders might be talking about into just one funding mechanism instead of talking about all of them individually. So I can break each of them individually out. You'll recognize many of the types of names. The exact percentages are a little bit different, but it's a lot of similar concepts to what you're hearing from either of those two campaigns.
Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, assuming you were king, dictator, authoritarian ruler of the United States, what are like a few of these like big changes you'd want to make to the American tax system right now?
Sure. So, well, one of them would be pretty simple. It would be flipping around that 20, the corporate tax cut rate, the 20%, 21%, that's got to go back up to 35% at least. I mean, obviously I would prefer it go higher, but within reason, I think that's where we could get it. I also really am a fan of CEO inequality taxes, CEO pay inequality taxes for median worker pay. So I just find statistics around the 1950s having CEOs make 20, maybe 30 times as much as their median worker. That made sense to me. That seemed like a pretty good living to me. I think it's insane that we're over 300 times as much the median income of a worker. So I am a fan of a tax rate that goes marginally up to 5% on corporations that are basically paying their CEOs an excessively high income. I also would put forward a Wall Street speculation tax. This would be just 0.1% on bonds and 0.5%. Yeah, 0.5% on stocks, stock transactions. So those are sort of the key, I think, policies that are relevant to corporations. There are individual tax rates. Like, for example, I'm a supporter of Medicare-for-all, so there would be a Medicare payroll tax is how I would pay for that. So that would be 4%. Which, given that most, I was seeing the average COPE premium is something like annually over $5,000. So if we were to look at, for example, my district has a pretty high median income. It's like $76,000. It's like way higher than most places. But even still, you'd be looking at around $3,000 a year. So $2,000 of savings with that type of system. So, so that's the general idea on the Medicare. And then with income taxes on an individual level, there is a wealth tax, an extreme wealth tax, similar to Bernie Sanders' wealth tax plan, up to 8%. I didn't do a whole lot of changes to that, but my income tax rates are a little bit different because they maintain certain aspects of some of the cuts for the lower income tax brackets that Trump put into effect, but reverses them on the upper income brackets. So there is some level of minor benefit for individuals making up to around like $85,000, $86,000 a year.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. Cool. Can I ask questions? Are you ready?
Yeah. You can rip into it.
Okay. I won't go to, or yeah, we won't. It's not a battle royale, but
No, that's cool.
So I'm kind of curious on the first point. We talk about
Yeah.
corporate tax rates.
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
Why do you like corporate tax rates? I'm curious. So some people might argue that corporate tax rates should be abolished altogether, and what we should focus on is just increasing like the actual tax brackets themselves. So rather than have like a separate schedule for corporations and people trying to figure out, what's better, is it corporate or personal, blah, 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 just have corporations pay no income tax. And then because the income flows through to individual workers, you just have a higher like schedule for those people. Like you increase like the actual wealthiest tax rates so that you don't catch like all corporations, that have people that don't make as much money versus a corporation with somebody that makes a ton of money.
I think that, I mean, I would have to check with people who are experts in financial, shall we say, investigations or
Mm-hmm.
some, but I would imagine that if you were to have, I think the paper trail around a company trying to avoid taxes, it's just an additional layer for us to be able to track those transactions. I think that it is something that if we want to ensure we're collecting that income tax, I mean, we see that the wealthiest people tend to be able to avoid taxes in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
So if even more is ending up in their pockets up front, that are just going to be able to come up with even more powerful ways to avoid that taxation. So I just think that subdividing the tax system in that way just allows for a greater level of accountability.
Okay. It seems weird to me to try to balance out I can't think of what like a fair corporate tax rate would be. Like I could have two companies. One company maybe does 500,000 in revenue a year, and the other company maybe does 250,000 in revenue a year. But maybe the company that does 500,000 in revenue a year, maybe the CEO of that company makes 150 grand a year. Maybe the CEO of the company that makes 250,000 a year, maybe that guy is like a multimillionaire. And the corporate tax rate for the poorer guy that works for the company that does more revenue, he would effectively end up paying more in taxes than the wealthier guy in a poor or less revenue company. It just seems the corporate tax rate thing is something that I've always had like a lot of trouble like understanding. I don't know why it's just like there is no corporate tax rate, and then because it all flows through to income anyway, or it should if you're pulling money out of a business as an individual, whether you're an owner or an employee, whatever it flows through to on your 1040 or whatever schedule, depending on how you pay taxes. It always seemed like it would just make more sense to make those tax rates higher, but sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I agree that like obviously if you could streamline a system and just break down those types of boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, if you could just scrap that and have it entirely work, I don't know of anywhere that that is really how it functions. So
Sure.
if we had some model we could learn from, I think that's just a pretty massive change because again, we're already able to track the fact that extremely wealthy people do manage to stash their cash in various ways. So we have to again build in as many mechanisms for accountability as possible within the system.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're able to ensure that there isn't going to be, that won't lead to a level of increased tax evasion, then
Sure.
I would be open to considering something along those lines in terms of simplifying the tax process. For me, the bigger thing that I find upsetting that
Mm-hmm.
I did like, one thing I can point to in the Netherlands, one of the very, very few things I can point to that I liked there while living there for a year was that starting a company as an entrepreneur was much more highly incentivized. In the United States, that we get taxed, you can be taxed 30 to 40% basically when you're 1099ing somebody. That's killer. Whereas over there, there was this insane tax incentive up to your first like 20,000 euros or something for your first 3 years of your business.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something where they really encouraged you when you were starting a company to to go for it. And so that's something where here I do think uh, the corporate tax rate is something that does need to come into alignment with what people who are 1099ing are having to pay. And so are you then proposing that contractors, any aspect of that those businesses no longer have a different, any type of different tax rate, that just goes away and we just go straight to marginal income tax rates. Is that what you're kind of proposing,
Yeah.
basically, is
Well, I
just
mean, like,
scrap all of that?
yeah, even if you have a high corporate tax rate, if you 1099 somebody, I mean, they still have their own, like, they're still going to pay self-employment tax. Like, even if you pay a high corporation,
Yeah.
yeah, if they're not like, if they're not a W-2 employee, their 1099 taxes are going to be the exact same, I'd imagine.
Right. No, that's it's an interesting concept, but it's not one that I've seen tested, and so it's not one that I would see worth fighting the battle over right now, given the issues we're facing.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it would be pretty radically it would be a pretty
it,
radical departure from our current like tax structure.
Yeah, like it would be pretty hard, like the political will it would take to get something like that done. While it very well may be something that does make things, make more sense, I just think that right now, yeah, there's a handful of other issues that would just come first. But obviously, like, we do need to fund these programs properly. So
sure.
Simplifying the discussion around it is a good discussion to have.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. On the second thing that you brought up in terms of CEO pay inequality. So this is one is always like a really interesting one to me.
Absolutely.
People talk about how CEOs make, a greater share or as a ratio of their income to their lowest level employee or even to their median employee, that the income that the CEO is making is greater and greater and greater. I know we've heard like 20 to 30 times is a good number, but greater than that isn't. I mean, if a company is like today, like 100 times larger than it used to be in the past, I'm curious, like, what is the metric by which how much a CEO should make? Like, how should we think about that? Like, what's a good way to analyze if it's too much or not enough?
So I think at the end of the day, the question is more around what do we need to function as a society? And so these individuals at a certain point are making enough money where I think it's fair to say that their beyond just their basic needs, but even their, luxurious needs are able to be met. Now, maybe not the most over-the-top abundance, but again, we're in a situation where the planet is beyond a certain capacity of a certain level of consumption. So we have to understand that it's to me, it's only moral that we ensure that we take care of our people, our planet, our system, before we're worried about people saying I make 10 million versus I make 5 million.
Sure.
I mean, at that point, it's zeros on a check that most of us can't even imagine ever making or having in our account. So, I mean, at a certain point, we're defending who? I'm not one of them. So, I don't know what to say other than, the main way I phrase my whole platform is that you're an individual making under $250,000, you're a couple making under $500,000. You're generally just going to see a net benefit from all of this. You're not going to see like some big tax increase. So, if you're making, I think I'm actually not targeting getting it down to 20 to 30 times even. I'm not even advocating getting it back to that, just to kind of go back to the initial numbers and everything. I'm not even advocating that. Mine would start at 50 times. So like, that's not to say like, oh, that's the perfect number. It's just, again, like, it's reasonable. You made a fair point. Companies are larger. They're more profitable. So it's fair to say there would be some level of increase in pay for the top executives at corporations between the 1950s and now. But again, once you're beyond this, these aren't insane amounts either. We're talking about 0.5% if you're making 50 times to 100 times more than your median worker. So this isn't like a crazy amount of corporate tax. We're talking 1% if you're making 100 to 150 times as much as your median worker. So this is up to 5% maximum if you're making 450 times more than your median worker. So it is a pretty small tax, all things considered, for when you really do the math. I mean, if you were to increase, I was doing it earlier, if you were to increase like the minimum wage to $15 an hour for the full year, you're looking at like $31,200 approximately, or something like that. So if we're pulling up, you know, $31,200. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you for
And
the feedback.
I've got Siri going here,
Yeah,
crazy.
no problem.
So let's just see. Looks like everything exited out from earlier, so I apologize.
No, that's fine.
I had, yeah, I mean, so 32,500. So times, basically, it's not any crazy math really for anybody to be doing themselves. It's just to be taking that times 50 and saying that, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you're making over, yeah, it's 1.6 million. I thought it was 1.5. $1.6 million. That's between stock options on top of that. There are other ways of basically accumulating wealth. That's kind of where the wealth tax gets into things, which is that a lot of these top income earners, you know, their income is being made off of other sources of wealth accumulation. It's not just their direct income.
Sure.
So you get a lot more creative beyond a certain income level as well. So that's why, to me, the corporate income tax, having that slight disincentive against excessive CEO pay, it's nothing. I don't find it to be anything extreme. It's just something that I think makes sense.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people do too, because I haven't really met anybody at my events lately who can say they fall in any of these tax brackets that even that stuff is like an issue for. Even if they're small business owners, they're not making that much. And also keep in mind that that's only that CEO pay. That's only for companies that are making $100 million a year. So if you're a small mom and pop shop and you've got some secret sauce to your whatever, you can make your $10, $20 million, $30 million each a year, and you're not going to have to worry about that if you're paying your workers minimum wage. It's more once you're at that 100 million revenue, that's where you start to say, okay, this is a company that's probably going to be publicly traded at some point. This is a company that's probably national, if not international, to some extent. And at that point, it's time to start to look at whether those CEOs are maximizing their salaries in just too many different ways.
Sure. For the Wall Street speculation tax, so a 0.1% on bonds and then a 0.5% tax on stock transactions. This seems like it would have a pretty huge impact on like market liquidity, for instance. Not as many people would be willing to buy and sell. How do you feel about that? I've looked at like I've heard these referred to as FTTs, financial transaction taxes, when they've been implemented in other parts of the world, especially Sweden. It seems like they have like a pretty big effect on how trading is done in the market. How do you feel? I guess you don't think that this type of financial transaction tax would be a big deal, or?
Well, I think it would be a pretty big deal in how it would change market behavior, but that's the idea behind it. It's that we have at this moment a series of algorithms that can be used for really maximizing profit in a way that destabilizes the broader system itself. And this strategy or this technology is being implemented by really the top firms. And so this is something where it's not the average person who's investing in a 401k that's having access to somebody who's trading at lightning speed. This is, again, these are higher level firms. And so when you're making thousands of transactions per minute, I do believe that there is the potential for that to have, and there are studies already showing and supporting the fact that that can have a destabilizing effect on, and maybe not a destabilizing impact, but an increased level of volatility can be attributed to that. And so I'm simply saying that as we're seeing the rise of this technology, I think that we should counteract it in some way, and that's one way that we can look at approaching it. Now, am I open to discussing those rates?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I mean, just like every one of these rates I've put out here, I'm going to get into Congress and have to renegotiate everything. So, so yeah, but broadly speaking,
have you ever thought about like so it sounds like what the goal here isn't really to target like certain types of transactions, but more like HFTs, like high frequency traders. Do you just want these types of things to not exist at all? Do you think they don't offer any benefit to like markets or anything?
It's not that I don't see them providing any value, but at the same time, like when it's pure again, that's why it's called speculation tax. When it's just speculation like that, I don't see the necessity for it. It doesn't disincentivize it entirely.
How do you differentiate between like speculation and like an actual trade because somebody wants a security?
To me, I look at where the value creation is occurring, what is actually being produced. And if this is just high frequency trading of Amazon and Apple stocks between different, announcements of new iPhone coming out and this or that coming out, then I don't see that as something that I should be concerned about. Having someone who's trying to make thousands of transactions per second manipulating the market, essentially. I mean, it's completely fair to make to participate in normal market activity. People should trade, people should invest, people should participate, and there has to be a healthy level of speculation for any market to function.
Yeah, I guess it seems kind of weird that like if you have like your uncle heard that Elon Musk is going on Joe Rogan, so he wants to buy like $2,000 in stock because he thinks that maybe his appearance will like make the stock go up. That would be considered, I guess, like a speculative trade, basically.
Well, so they would your uncle would purchase these, and it would depend. Does he sell it immediately, or does he he goes on Joe Rogan and not a whole lot happens, and he actually ends up sitting on that Tesla stock for a month or two. That it's to me, it's these transactions that are like that we need to be concerned about. And I don't think your uncle is setting up some timed thing so that the moment at 9:01 p.m. when Elon Musk's, the feed kicks in, that there are going to be 10 bots all submitting transactions with various amounts counteracting one another and balancing one another out to try and maximize the profit they can get off that trade. I mean, that's not the type of trade that your uncle is going to be making. So it would be highly unlikely it would be caught or subjected to this type of tax.
Sure. Okay. You mentioned like a Medicare-for-all tax, like an additional payroll tax. Would this just go add on to like FICA taxes, or?
Yes, this would be just like a Social Security tax, just like anything that comes out of your paycheck, state taxes. It will be for everyone. There won't be any exceptions. It's not marginal in any way. It doesn't go up for higher earners. It's just a flat 4%.
Would this have like a cap on would this have a cap on income, kind of like how Social Security does, or would this go up infinitely too?
This would go up infinitely.
Gotcha. And then I'm guessing that 4% Medicare for all payroll tax would, so this is a tax that would impact through every income level, like FICA taxes currently do. Are you worried about like middle class or lower income people kind of like approaching you with something like that?
So I like to be honest. I mean, when I started, I wouldn't call when my campaign initially launched, I was calling my Medicare for All thing Universal Doctor Program, because I just wanted to talk about like the economics of it and how it worked and all that. People were just kind of like, what is this? So it's just easier to call it this now. And to just point to, again, the numbers, which are what people's average premiums are around here, and when you compare those costs to what a 4% payroll tax would be at really any income bracket across the district, there are going to be very few people that find themselves doing better now than they would be under that. If anything, I'm seeing an average of around 40 to 41% savings on healthcare costs annually per household. So that's something that I think is pretty massive and is worth kind of underscoring.
Okay.
So, I mean, yeah, it I think would be dishonest to say we could fund something as large as that without, without some sort of funding mechanism.
Sure.
But over time, over 10 years, it is expected to end up being cheaper. Although I've seen some studies saying that our generation has a startlingly high level of medical costs. So we'll see if the healthcare system actually is cheaper in 10 years.
Yeah. Asking about like the wealth tax, you said up to 8% on the higher income tax brackets.
Yes.
How do you plan to get around? So one of the biggest hurdles that I've heard about implementing a wealth tax is that it's extremely resource intensive, that to evaluate an entire person's like net worth would require like a lot of investigators to dig through a lot of stuff and do a lot of work, and that two, people will dramatically underreport their worth as well, requiring said investigators. How do you plan on getting around that when we already have like such a super underfunded IRS? Is there like an easy way to implement something like this, or?
I don't think it's meant to be super easy, but most proposals for a wealth tax have a margin of error built into it for tax evasion, essentially is what that amounts to, underreporting. So there are already expectations on what that level of evasion would be. Now, my bigger concern, and I'll be honest on this front, coming from the blockchain space and the digital currency space, I don't think any of these calculations have accounted for the fact that if wealthy individuals felt enough pressure that there are these alternative stores of value that they may at some point decide to move towards. I don't think that any of their considerations include that. So that's something where I'll be honest and say, coming from that background, I do have questions around the implementation, around whether there are newer technologies that would allow evasion literally of just dollars, not even having to worry about some fancy painting that they hide in their basement and don't report or something. But that's something where I think, more broadly speaking, we're going to need to have just a broader conversation on these digital currencies at some point.
Sure.
Because yeah, and I think I don't want to distract from your question around the wealth tax, but that's something that really comes to mind for me, because there are a handful of pretty wealthy people who, anytime you see those things doing well, they come out and they're on CNBC or they're on Fast Money or they're on wherever, throwing out their expectations of where things are going. And yeah, that's something that we've got to be aware of.
Yeah, it also just seems weird in terms of like a wealth tax. Like if I had a retirement account and maybe by the end of my life I had like $10 million in there, like, am I really going to be paying with an 8% wealth tax? Am I really going to be forking out? Would that be like $80,000 a year? Is just going to the government?
So $10 million, you're not subjected.
Oh,
it doesn't start. It doesn't even start until 32 million.
Okay, gotcha. So it wouldn't impact people.
So 32 to 50 million, you've got one of an additional wealth tax. So 50 to 250 million, a 2%. 250 to 500 million, a 3%. 500 million to $1 billion, 4%. I can keep going. Yeah, 1 to 2.5 billion, 5%. 2.5 to 5 billion, 6. 5 to 10 billion, 7. 10 billion plus 8%.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
we're talking like extreme wealth. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's reasonable to say that if you're making $200,000 a year, by the time you retire, you might have a couple $1,000,000 if the markets are doing well and you're investing responsibly. So yeah, you should not be subjected to an additional wealth tax just for planning your retirement properly. That would be absurd.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, and then moving on, so moving away from tax questions, for the automation stuff, you're talking about taxing robots. How do you figure out what counts as a
I
robot?
love this. I love this. So, all right, here's my concern is first off, I don't want to be lumped into the category of someone who supports something like I think Bill Gates has recently had a few different conversations where he's talked about like a robot tax and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make it clear that that's not what I'm a proponent of at all. To be honest, I think that the question you just posed is one that requires I hope it's not too politician-y of me to say,
Mm-hmm.
but I literally think we need some sort of committee within Congress looking at emerging technologies and these threats to the workforce. Because I think these questions around what does qualify as a robot, what's going to qualify as a personal assistant, what's going to qualify as just a device or just a health device, what's going, like each of these questions and the lines between each of them are going to keep getting more and more blurred, and it's going to have implications for, if we do Medicare for all, what types of devices are just a device, which types of things are an assistant.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to become a real question. And so we're going to have the ability to define these things. And
It just seems like a really difficult
it's a
one because,
very
like,
broad.
yeah, like,
And I
is
don't
a
think I
vending
can
machine
individually.
does a vending machine like replace like a cashier, or like should the self checkout aisles at Target, like, let's say you could do
I
just
do
10,
think
yeah.
I think self-checkout, yes. I think that is something where I would jump on it immediately and be like, yeah, that's something I would disincentivize immediately because it does take away jobs for really no reason. I personally don't enjoy packing my bags like that. When I get to the stores at 10 o'clock and I'm tired from speaking at 2 events and whatever else, and I've got a thing of groceries and I'm at the checkout counter, the last thing I want to do is sit there and check out all my own shit. I would always have grown up being able to just put my stuff on the conveyor belt and have it taken care of and, hi, how are you, swipe my card. So that would absolutely, but vending machines, I think that's there's it's hard to make the type of argument that falls in the same category. I mean, unless you're talking like one of these shops where it's like 11 o'clock at night and they have like the little microwave cubbies kind of thing. I don't know. Does that qualify? That I honestly would say that's
Yeah.
that's a
It seems weird because labor has gotten so much more productive over the past 100 years, where so much technology has replaced so many workers. So it seems weird now to start saying like, well, now we're going to tax certain types of capital when we haven't in the past. Like, for instance, like an Excel program can replace like 20 people working at a filing cabinets. But if I have one piece of software to do it, should that software be taxed like an employee? That just seems like a really difficult question to answer.
No, absolutely. And that's why I think that it's one that for me to put out, people have pushed me on this of what is your exact tax rate? What exactly is the definition of this?
Mm-hmm.
And it's something where I want to call attention to this issue. I want to raise it. I want to have a discussion around it. Do I have all of the answers to it right now? No.
Okay. And then it also seems kind of weird because our unemployment is so low right now in the United States as well, that like worrying about automation, I guess certain industries have been threatened, but for the most part, I think we're at like 3.5% on unemployment right now in the US. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people have questioned that metric though, when you see the level of inequality, the number of jobs people are working, and the wage stagnation over the last several decades. That's not something that we can really ignore, even if people are quote unquote employed. So yeah, I mean, it's something where even the most recent trade deals could really be attributed for more of the manufacturing losses in many ways than aspects of automation That said, there are industries that are investing more heavily than others. I think in particular, it is within retail that I think the World Economic Forum put out a report just a couple of weeks ago on basically the topic that used self-checkout counters as an example. And like they found actually it hit women particularly hard. That was one of the outcomes, was that there are certain industries where certain demographics have managed to do particularly well. And that's one where within retail, women tend to hold key roles. And that's an industry being hit harder. So that's something where, again, I just think that if we're not aware of these issues, if we're not observing them and asking questions on it and having a conversation, then we're not going to be ready once the breakthrough comes in that does have trucks actually automated and ready to go down. Like that will put so many people out of work. We need to be prepared for what that looks like and how we deal with that type of future. And that's why I'm advocating for some type of committee to be created on emerging technologies to observe how we can, because we're really moving to a point that's unlike anything we've had before. I mean, sure, we've had an increase in productivity, but getting to the point of quite literally having self-driving cars, of quite literally having, that's not, we're not there yet. We're years away from that still. But again, there are companies investing tens of millions, if not billions, in these types of technologies, where the moment that these types of things happen, I mean, nobody had an iPhone until everybody had an iPhone. So I just hesitate to assume that it's a non-issue, just because it doesn't seem like the most pressing issue right now when you see how much money is being put into it.
Sure. Okay. The final point you brought up had to do with climate crisis, Green New Deal. So I know that, like, as a congressperson, you, on one end, you're going to be making policy for the entire United States, but then you also have to be very sensitive to issues that are local to your constituents, right? And I'm in California right now, and we've had to deal with some of this down in LA even. How do you balance, for your constituents, you're in the Rust Belt, right? Pennsylvania has a rich history in manufacturing. I'm sure you have like fossil energy companies around there. How do you deal with their concerns related to the pushing of green energy and the penalizing of fossil fuels? How do you balance out like the concerns of union workers and manufacturers and energy workers down there with something like the Green New Deal?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a question I was just asked Saturday in an interview. So this is really an area where we have to be realistic about, if we invest in something like a Green New Deal, it's going to mean having to make investments in education and job retraining. Not just job retraining, job placement, but like people may not want to work in those industries anymore. If they may not want to transition from that job to solar, they may be fine with that job, and if that job goes away, want to find something else. All that I can say is that we have to be providing these stepping stones for these people to their next job. And if that means, for example, another cornerstone of my policy is debt-free college and trade school, or public college and trade school. So that's something where if you're not happy with that job anymore and that job is going away, you should be able to transition into a different career, learn about a different career, and move on in that regard, and move through a job placement program, which I call, actually, with my platform, the Jobs and Sustainable Human Activities Initiative. And this is basically, it's a 5-year program for now, and it would be about a $1 trillion investment into job placement and retraining initiatives. So we need to be looking at that Wall Street tax that would fund the debt-free college, trade school and public college. So we could basically have workers moving through one of those two streams to their next role, because at the end of the day, it's a 1,500 worker union in the area. So that is a big deal. It absolutely is something where we need to be aware of the impacts on them. The reality is, though, we can't wait. So all we can do is provide the tools necessary for them to not need to worry about this transition, and to, and to listen to those concerns, and make sure that there's a well-rounded policy.
Have you ever have you had any meetings yet with like any labor officials or people that are involved in these types of industries, or is that still on the agenda before the election, hopefully?
Yeah, it's on the election agenda for now. I am allies within the Medicare-for-all community, because there are a lot of those in the area. So I found there are certain union groups that are interested in talking more. That's been really the key for now. The Green New Deal is something where I do think it's going to be thorny in certain parts of the district, but by and large, voters are in favor of it and young people are in favor of it, which is a lot larger than the 1,000-person union.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, that's it at the end of the day, is that I'm meant to represent everybody in the district. And so I'll do my best to do that. You know, if that's what people want, I'm going to make my best argument for it, and make sure we just take care of everybody along the way.
Yeah, okay. All right. Are there any other what other like big issues, I guess, do you have when you go out? You said that you just recently came from a couple, like, not town halls, but a couple like meeting speech things. What did you guys mainly talk about there? What do voters usually ask you about?
So I of course get the question all the time of, why are you running? And, why aren't you just letting one of the other candidates do this? That happens pretty much every day. These were two Bucks County Democratic Committee groups. I was mentioning there's 54 of those throughout the county. So this was just hitting two of them tonight. So for that, it's just focusing on the fact that it's on the substance of the issues we're dealing with. And so if we're talking about a solar program and you want that addressed, I'm the only one who has a plan out on my website in any way that addresses that. So whether you love it or not, whether you want to talk to me and tear it apart and say, look, it should be a little bit different on this way or that way, excellent. At least the stuff is there, and it's open for discussion. Some of my competitors actually don't even have any issues on their page at all. So you can't even really go and hold them accountable for taking a statement, or a position on anything. So that's something where, it's I think really beneficial to just put forward all of my policies so people just know where I stand. And that way, as a young person, it's as best I can do. Other questions? They're really just concerned about beating. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate, but it can just devolve to, let's just beat the Republican. Like, people just want to beat the Republicans. They don't care. They just want to beat. And it's kind of like, well, what after that? Like, once you win, what do you do? How do you make sure that you don't lose the next midterm election and actually like hold that seat? Like, what is the plan that we're moving towards? And that's where a lot of people get pretty lost, because they're like, well, I don't know. And that's really where there's an opening to just get back to my policies. So it's been good in that way, but people just want to see a lot of raising. That's it. People just want to see you raising a ton of money. They like seeing my competitors raise certain amounts, even if 3/4 or 2/3 of it were self-funded. Like, it doesn't matter to some people. It's just the bottom dollars. So that's, for me, been a bit of I'll be honest, that's been an area where I have a little bit of a harder time answering them, because I have fundraised less, but I'm working on ramping that up this month. I've got a couple of different initiatives. So that's really it. Trying to push all of them to go to my website, and giving a 3 to 5 minute pitch to each of them, and SkylarForCongress.com, and asking them to be a part of the petitioning period, because I have to get 1,000 signatures to actually get on the ballot as well at the end of this month. There's like a 3-week window you have to get your signatures during. So that's like the key ground outreach campaign that'll happen soon.
And that 3-week period hasn't started yet?
No, that's January 28th through February 18th.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm got a couple of volunteer leaders that are set up, but we're still recruiting more volunteers to get out and help us get on the ballot so that we can actually have at least a debate around these issues leading up to April, and hopefully win it and take that for a full general and have some good debates. That'll be really different. I just think that we had a really, really well-off multimillionaire self-finances campaign in 2018. We had and lost. We had some big name people from around the district try to run, and they've lost. And a lot of them keep asking why, and it's kind of like nobody's running on issues. Nobody's talking about issues. I know tonight I kind of feel bad. We focused a lot on tax, so I feel like some of your people. I hope some of your viewers are interested in that. I could have talked more about like sexy topics, but yeah, that was. I think it's good to just lay the foundation of like the reality of where things stand and get there and how to do it. But I'm hopeful that moving forward, we can bring some real change to this district. And yeah, I'm just really excited that there are alternative media outlets like this to get out and to get onto. And I'm curious to know if there are others out there that do similar type of Twitch streams and things like that. I'm always curious to engage with people like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other big guy that does stuff like this on Twitch is Hassan, but I'm not sure if he talks to people that are running for office or what the process is to go through that. But yeah. I mean, are there any other like final things you want to bring up or anything you'd like to talk about that we didn't get to or whatever? You can bring up like another issue or something if you want to.
So, well, what about you? What are when you think of a purple district, what do you see top of mind as like the issue you would expect to be, I don't know, not the silver bullet, but
important issues for Rust Belt states. Well, it seems like those were the main states that failed the Democratic Party in the 2016 election season. It felt like a lot of that, it felt like an issue that was important to that, very broadly speaking, was globalization. And on a more local level, it was the impact of globalization on those job markets. That on one end, maybe we have cheaper goods across the United States, but manufacturers throughout the whole Rust Belt region were losing, lots of jobs, that a lot of those communities were suffering, and that Hillary didn't really seem to be addressing that much at all. I don't know in terms of your particular district how much that is represented. It might be in your district, maybe it's more suburbs than laborers or more wealthy areas versus like manufacturing workers or whatever. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, I imagine that would be my idea, is starting somewhere around there. Yeah, but I don't know. I'm sure your district makeup better than I do, but yeah.
No. I mean, it absolutely makes sense. I mean, I think that you've got a solid point. It's strange here. It's a district that's doing kind of too well for its own good. I almost call it like a bubble in a lot of ways, because if you look at the core concerns, like they're actually national security, like immigration is surprisingly high on a lot of people's agendas, at least on like the independent or right, or conservative side or whatever.
Get a lot of
surprisingly high, even though we're far from the border.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like a lot of illegals don't end up in Pennsylvania.
No, exactly. Like we're really far. We're really at Canada. That's surprising, and that's something where, like last Friday, I was at a protest for kids being in cages, because that's ridiculous. And there's a guy who comes up and he's just like, hey, what are you, communists? You want these kids just to free go out into the country? You just want no borders? You just want it's just like there's some disconnect between people of just like, dude, we're literally talking about putting kids in these inhumane conditions. Like, just back up for a second and let's recognize, like, what if that were your kid? If your crop failed 4 years in a row and you had no choice for your kid to survive, what would you do? Like,
Can I real quick?
It's
I'm gonna switch servers for the call for 1 second. Your thing, like
yeah.
you're right where your camera's doing crazy stuff. Hold on 1 second.
Has it been doing that the whole time?
No, it just started. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, sorry. Okay, are you do the Democrats there tend to be a bit more conservative or a bit more liberal? I'm guessing since it's purple, it sounds like they're a bit more conservative than liberal.
Yeah, here I would venture to even say that there's a lot of there's been some transition from the Republican Party into the Democratic Party, so that there are kind of a lot of even dinos kind of around. So there are some Bernie-crats hidden in the group, very closet-like though about their beliefs. It is pretty conservative, where everybody socially, they will talk about everything: equal rights, universal health care, education for everybody, pre-K, all of that. They'll talk the talk about everything. But then when it comes down to like, okay, so you're a fan of Medicare-for-all, or like, oh, or just you have like a plan otherwise, or you go down the list of those policies and it's like, oh no, just don't rock the boat on that.
Sure.
So that has been a bit of something where I'm excited to be one of the campaigns that is just calling these issues out and openly addressing them and allowing voters to feel comfortable to say that there is an issue in certain areas and that this is a campaign that's going to fight for those issues. So I think you're right, though. It's definitely a bit more conservative, and I do not expect at all when they have this endorsement vote in the first week of February that I would be getting, they have to get 60% to endorse a candidate. So with 4 of us, I think it will be very hard. Again, I really think it will be split. But yeah, there's no way that I'm going to be the one who gets that 60. So it's all about splitting that and having an excellent group of volunteers, which is what I'm really excited about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Do you want to, I guess the website that we had before was, I know you're twitter.com/Skylar for Congress. That's you, right?
Yeah, that's for me. There's skylarforcongress.com. Like I said earlier, I've got some issues on that page. I'll be launching the fair tax platform and all the exact rates in the next few days. You can make donations through there and all that type of stuff. So yeah, the campaign is really off to a great start and is just looking to engage more in with all types of audiences, all types of voices, and really all types of formats. So this was my first time doing a Twitch like this, and hope that it was okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think it went okay. If that's it, then I guess I wish you good luck. It's pretty late over there now. It's probably about midnight, right?
I was gonna say, yeah, I'm getting a little spacey here. It's past midnight, so
Sure.
so yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and thanks again, and hope we can maybe talk again in a couple of weeks to see how the campaign is progressing.
Yeah, for sure. Just reach out to me, and yeah, good luck.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Have a good one. Bye.
See you. Bye.
I like being able to binge watch like anime and shit, but actually I really like
Pepe always wins.
the social experience of